So I recently did a particular video breaking down which version of Optimus Prime was stronger out of the Bay films and Bumblebee movie. And since we weren't able to compile enough info on the reboot Prime, we ultimately came to the conclusion that Bayverse is the more powerful one. It's pretty plain to see that the first wave of live action movies have amassed a substantial amount of evidence to deduce that they're stronger. As for Bumblebee, that's still up for debate, and I'll more than likely cover it in a future video. But today I want to focus our attention on the evil Decepticon commander, Megatron. He's been a very consistent cast member in terms of his appearances in the live-action Bayverse, and since he was ultimately axed in the final version of the Bumblebee movie, I wanted to do an in-depth analysis on the 5 versions we've seen from TF1 through TF5. Now, before we dive into the topic at hand, I gotta give a major shout out to today's sponsor, Red Magic. As we all know, human technology in the Bayverse Transformers films were reverse engineered from Megatron, and even though this is very fictitious, it kinda makes me wonder, what if there was an advanced piece of tech that actually was reversed by an alien life form? What if this came in the form of a powerful phone? Well, look no further than the latest edition of the Nubia Red Magic family, the Red Magic 5S. This bad boy is well equipped to handle the most demanding mobile games. 144Hz refresh rate on a 6.65 Esports display. For such a sleek device, it features some interesting things under the hood, such as the ICE 4.0 active liquid cooling with the turbo fan, and the Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 dual mode 5G that allows you to power through the most intense games and play on the fastest data connections. If you're a gamer with big hands like me, or you're just very particular when it comes to phones feeling comfortable in your hands, then fret not, because the Red Magic 5S features these highly responsive 320Hz shoulder triggers that make it virtually impossible to experience finger cramps. My favorite feature to use is the game space, which allows me to further optimize the performance of games to my liking. From the 4500 bank battery life to the 250 gigabytes of storage, this phone has it all. And it comes in 2 cool looking colors such as the Sonic Silver and the Awesome Pulse, which I have for my phone. So definitely pick up this phone so you can stay in the lead of mobile gaming. You can do so by clicking the link that'll be provided in the description of this video. But yeah guys, for better or worse, Megatron continues to be brought up in conversations regarding these movies, and I think it's because of how he constantly changed from film to film, not just from an outward appearance, but also in terms of power. Right out the gate, his overall strength came into question in the first movie because people felt like it didn't properly represent his G1 version. In the 80s cartoons, he's always been Optimus Prime's equal. The two occasionally one-up each other in battle, but for the most part, it's always been an even playing field when it comes to them. But when Transformers 07 rolled around, it made it quite clear that Megatron was far stronger than Optimus Prime, and many people consider this to be his peak in terms of potential. According to an early interview with Michael Bay, the first movie Megatron stood at a staggering 41 feet tall, but later on it was established that he was officially 35 feet tall and weighed at 5.7 metric tons by Hasbro. His computer-generated model consisted of 2,411 individual parts, 433,949 polygons, 8,924 rig nodes, and 1,437 texture maps. The pieces combined gave a volume of 10,325 cubic feet. In terms of his overall design, I'd say this is my third favorite because it's essentially his Cybertronian form. It not only reinstates that he was too powerful to scan the Earthlings' vehicles, it also shows that he didn't really need to since his body was designed for combat. Even though protoforms are essentially the endoskeletal form of the Cybertronians before they arrive on Earth, Megatron was pretty much hard all over compared to the Autobots when they were in their natural state. So he was a pretty big boy, especially compared to Optimus, who was 3 feet shorter and fully loaded in Earth-based vehicle parts. And if you ask me, his size was one of the contributing factors behind his dominance in battle. His super thick chassis allowed him to take multiple blasts from Jazz without leaving a dent. He even received a charged blast on his shoulder, and he was shot on the leg shortly before he ripped the little Autobot Lieutenant in two with his bare claws. According to the movie guide, Megatron is one of the few Transformers capable of space travel without reverting to a protoform space pod, which explains how he was capable of chasing the Allspark immediately after its launch. When he came face to face with his arch nemesis Optimus, he flew into him in his interstellar jet form, slamming him into a building before flying right through an office block. Both leaders landed in the middle of the intersection, but Megatron was the first to recover, reconfirming that he was the toughest of the two. When it came to gunplay, he was quite the marksman. He managed to blast the aforementioned Jazz with a single arm blaster, which seemed to be the easier weapon to use since it didn't pack a lot of power, nor did it have an obnoxiously long charge time. But his fusion cannon, on the other hand, does suffer from this issue. While it's his most powerful blaster, it does take a bit of time to use. Megatron has to combine his arms together to form it, and it takes a while to get the blast off. Before he could use it on Optimus, the Autobot leader drew his ion blaster and fired Megatron, hitting him. But he avoided the full brunt of the blast by spinning around for the momentum momentum, and I don't hear people talking about this moment enough. Like, this is essentially Cybertron martial arts slash gung fu at its finest, because that blast came at Megatron pretty fast, but he instinctively avoided it like it was nothing by utilizing his speed and experience on the battlefield. And when he finally hit Optimus with his fusion cannon, it left the Autobot leader stunned long enough for him to go give chase to Sam. So this version of Megatron was more than capable of dealing with anyone from the Autobots camp. If he had succeeded in his mission of retaining the Allspark, all the Autobots would have died along with humanity. But as we all know, things went south once the thing he was so hell-bent on obtaining ultimately led to his demise. Which brings us to our next version of the character, TF2 Megatron. This form, in my opinion, is very underrated because people never really bring it up as much as they bring up the other versions like TF1, 4, and 5. And nobody mentions that this is literally the first triple changer we see in the live-action film verse. When resurrected by an Allspark fragment, Megatron gained the alt mode of a flying Cybertronian tank thanks to an infusion of new parts from the Little One in addition to his Cybertronian jet mode from before. And his body features more armor than the previous version, but it seems like he has gotten significantly weaker in some areas. Since he sported these bulky tank legs, he couldn't move as fast as he did in the first film. I'd also like to point out how it made him very disproportionate since his upper body was vastly smaller than his lower half. I mean, don't get me wrong, these ligaments weren't useless. They packed enough power to completely shatter Optimus Prime's iconic mouth guard, but they still presented an Achilles heel. They slowed him down a lot. As seen in the epic forest fight, Optimus Prime knew to exploit this new weakness. When Megatron first tried to kick Optimus, he was able to quickly catch his leg and elbow it, and the Autobot leader was able to get in a good stab in the very same leg. Since Megatron was slower, he had to resort to transforming into a Cybertronian tank mode to give him an extra boost. So his injuries from the first film hurt him in the long run, but there were some injuries that helped him in other areas. He may have lost his left arm, but he was upgraded to a claw sword, or as I like to call it, a pincer on his right arm. Instead of spending a great deal of time to join his arms together to use his fusion cannon, he's now able to house it in his pincer. And the housing can also be extended for use as a sword, making it very useful in long and close range fights. As seen when Megatron managed to stab Optimus Prime from behind and after insulting his emotional state, shoot him through his chest, destroying his spark. But this very same weapon also ended up giving him arguably his worst injury. As the fallen and Optimus Prime battled on the ground in Egypt, Megatron tried to attack Optimus, but Optimus used Megatron's own cannon to blast half of his face off and severed his right arm. And this is where we get into arguably the weakest version of Megatron, which is TF3 Dark of the Moon Megatron. Megatron gets completely overshadowed in this movie. Apparently he becomes a bit more sensitive about his appearance in Dark of the Moon and uses a hooded cloak to cover his damaged face. But it's possible that the cloak also serves as a dual purpose of protection. Since Megatron has taken up residence in the hot, arid climate of Africa, it makes sense that he would cover his open wound from the sand. This time around, he's taken it upon himself to finally adopt an Earth farm, which is a Mack Granite tanker truck. The mode was chosen to put him on parallel with his arch nemesis Optimus Prime, whose alt mode is a Peterbilt semi-truck. Something that I don't think many fans are aware of is that he doesn't really do much on the battlefield in TF3, which is crazy because he fought in any and almost every fight in the first two films, but in Dark of the Moon he only fought once and it wasn't even his fight. I noticed that he was less aggressive and even undergoes a very strange mood swing when Cybertron is brought to Earth. In one scene, he simply sat in an alleyway, avoiding the final battle to intently watch Cybertron teleport into the Earth's atmosphere. He doesn't even attempt to harm Carly after she talks trash to him. And I guess we could contribute this change in mood to the fact that he was severely weakened and his head had been damaged. Not to mention the fact that Sentinel probed his skull with his hand minutes earlier. But on the flip side, I'd say that this is one of the more cooler looking designs compared to the first two versions. I love how he looks like this rogue warrior with the chains going across his chest. And I absolutely love his new fusion shotgun, which replaces the fusion cannon due to the latter getting cleaved off by Optimus in Revenge of the Fallen, as I mentioned earlier. It isn't as strong as the fusion cannon, however it can be lethal if used the right way. It definitely did more than enough damage to severely wound Sentinel Prime enough for Optimus to take him out, but unfortunately it wasn't enough for him to survive. And his death in Dark of the Moon has caused discontent among some fans, seeing as it made him look very weak. Having attacked and severely wounded Sentinel Prime, who had just beaten up Optimus near death, one would believe that Megatron stood a chance against Optimus. Not so though. He was quickly decapitated by Optimus in less than 10 seconds with only one arm, resulting in one of the shortest fights in the entire film franchise. Many Megatron fans have felt that he deserved a bigger battle and much more epic death considering his role throughout the series, instead of getting de-spined after talking all that trash. Fun fact, in an earlier draft of Dark of the Moon script, Megatron is sincere when he offers Optimus Prime a truce at the end. Optimus accepts and Megatron and the remaining Decepticons leave Earth to rebuild Cybertron. Although this ending was ultimately scrapped for the film, it was in fact used for the novelization and the comic book adaptation. But moving on, we get into the more interesting forms of Megatron, which do a complete 180 compared to his previous two forms that were a bit nerfed in certain areas. What I absolutely love about Age of Extinction and Last Night is how they took everything that was cool about Megatron in the earlier films and made it cooler. Instead of completely ditching the truck mode from Dark of the Moon, Age of Extinction takes it a step further by making him equal to Optimus Prime in almost every way. A few years after the Battle of Chicago, Megatron's remains are acquired by KSI, who are attempting to force their own Transformers with Transformium. Their CEO Joshua Joyce forces brains to download information from Megatron's head, which the Decepticon leader silently allows so Joshua can gain the information needed to succeed, which will grant Megatron access to a new body. He then infects and possesses the unit Galvatron, and this is probably the most agile version of Megatron. Thanks in part to Transformium, he's capable of transforming into tiny metal particles that grant him more flexibility than ever before. But his weapons are a little lacking. Instead of his signature fusion cannon, he now sports missile launchers that pale in comparison. And he only has these little blades at the end of his arms. So that's a bit of a bummer. But he's more than capable of dealing with Optimus with his bare hands when he has the upper hand, but is quickly interrupted when lockdown intervenes. And that's pretty much all we get from this version, which is a bit disappointing. He almost didn't participate in the commencement of the battle in Hong Kong, which allowed him to escape. And this brings us to our final form, the Last Night Megatron. What's great about this version is how it goes back to the basics. Not only does Megatron retain his signature arm-mounted fusion cannon and interstellar jet form, his original G1 voice actor finally returns to voice him as opposed to just voicing Galvatron in the previous movie. And this version sounds more confident than ever, and he looks super imposing in his new nightly armored robot mode. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the most times Megatron is engaged in battle in one film. We see him attack the Autobots in their junkyard hideout, followed by a fight in a nearby town. And later in the movie, we see him leading the charge at Stonehenge, where he works with Quintessa and uses the staff to transfer the energy within the dormant Unicron to bring it back to life for Cybertron. And that fight continues in Quintessa's lair, where he almost decapitates Hound, only to be stopped by Hot Rod's time bubble gun. Another fact that I would like to point out is that Megatron is the only character appearing in all 5 movies to receive a distinctly different body design and alternate form for each film. While each of the changes he undergoes in prior films is given an explicit in-story reason, his new body in Transformers The Last Night is left unexplained, even though he states that he's been working with Quintessa. But nonetheless, this version returns back to being that super powerful Decepticon leader we saw in the first film. In almost every scene, it took more than one Autobot to fight him. Even Optimus needed help to gain the upper hand. So this is definitely one of the more popular versions of Megatron. But with all that being said, I think it's time we rate each form from lowest to highest. For number 5, I'm going with the Dark of the Moon Megatron. The character didn't really do much outside of Blast Sentinel in the back, and as I mentioned earlier, he was probably more tamed in that movie due to his head injury. At number 4, I'm gonna go with Revenge of the Fallen Megatron for his unbalanced body and super slow speed. At number 3, I went with Galvatron since his weapons had been nerfed and we didn't get the chance to see what he could really do in terms of combat. For number 2, and this was a close one, but I had to pick TF5 Megatron for this spot because even though he is super powerful, I felt like he wasn't completely off the rails since he had Quintessa barking orders at him. That's why I had to put TF07 at the top. He was such a monster in that film, and before the whole concept of the Fallen being his master was introduced, it was pretty clear that he was the one calling all the shots, and the only thing that could defeat him was the most powerful artifact in Cybertronian history, the Allspark. So that's what I'm rolling with. Anyways, how would you guys rank each form? Let me know down in the comments below. As always, I ask you like or dislike the video. It doesn't have to be a thumbs up, it can be a thumbs down. Any feedback is good feedback and will only help me improve on future videos. But if you really enjoyed this video, it would help me out tremendously if you shared it with all your friends and followers on social media. Sharing really makes a difference. But once again, this is your boy RBG signing out on another video. I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.